As far as business is concerned, you have to remember you're going to get two types of questions in your exam. You could get one specifically on business. You could get one that asks you to compare Kant and utilitarianism to business. Whatever happens, if you get a general question in the exam that's something like, there is no such thing as ethics in business discussed, you need to bring in one of your arguments. You cannot do a whole essay on that without bringing in either Kant or utilitarianism. You do not need to bring in natural law and situation ethics. They have euthanasia. This is just for Kant and utilitarianism. Students are not big fans of business ethics. I don't know why, because all this is buzzwords. Once you've got the buzzwords, you've got this topic down, and it's actually very, very relevant to all of you, so it's a really good one to do. So, top box, it's split into two. The first part is just for the Henry Ford quote, please. A business that makes nothing but money is a poor kind of business. So that goes in the little part of the top first box. A business that makes nothing but money is a poor kind of business. Henry Ford. In the part connected with this, you can then outline the Ford Pinto case. You, of course, don't need to write all of that. You wouldn't even need to win an exam. The outline of the story is in 1970, so we're not talking that long ago. Many of you now in your families might drive Ford cars, for example. Ford Pinto, when they were manufacturing it, they found a design fault. That meant if the car was impacted in the rear end in a collision at 20 miles per hour or more, the gas tank broke, therefore causing fuel to leak and essentially fires to happen. Rather than Ford Pinto changing the design, they worked out and calculated the cost of the deaths that might be incurred versus the price of changing all the cars. What they found out, and the lorries, what they found out that if they were fined for 180 burn deaths of 200,000, 180 burn injuries and 2,100 burnt vehicles. So they're working out people dying because of their car versus changing all the vehicles. It would only cost them 49.5 million to help people that died or be burned versus 137.5 million to change them all. What did they decide? Because it wasn't law, because they didn't have to, they didn't change the car, even though they also had the patent for a safer gas tank. So they couldn't even use the excuse of, we didn't have an alternative. They did. They had an alternative gas tank. They found it, but because it would cost them more, they didn't change it. It then later became legal that if you ever find a fault like this, you have to change it. At this time, it was not law, so they didn't bother. All right, box underneath is split into two. One side for Dame Anita Roddick, the other side for Lord Alan Sugar. This box questions the idea of, is ethics, or is it good business to be ethical? And the word oxymoron means these two words that don't go together, like a cold fire. Good, ethical business. Does ethical business really go together? Is there such a thing as being ethical? Dame Anita Roddick obviously established Body Shop. She promoted and looked at the idea of animal care and not testing on animals. She says being good is good business. So this could be argued for being more intrinsic reasons. Intrinsic because it's the right thing to do. So intrinsic reasons, you can judge your business on these as to whether you think they do it because it's the right thing to do, or is it because they want to look good, like Alan Sugar. So Lord Alan Sugar says this quote, "Are you the cheap one, the one with good service, the ethical or bespoke one? What's your hook?" What he's arguing there is being ethical is just your hook into business. So what he would argue is companies like Lush, it's just really good business. to not be animal testing. They're the ethical one, that's why they get customers in. And so that could be argued to be more extrinsic reasons. Your intentions behind it is purely so that you get more customers or are more popular. What we're moving on to now is CSR, or corporate social responsibility. So corporate social responsibility, there's not a space to add these in, but it is on the PowerPoint obviously when you come to revise. The top box, so this box is split into different sections. The top long thin bit is for Milton Friedman. Now there's a lot on that slide, you need to summarise it. Milton Friedman discussed the ideas of corporate social responsibility. So that goes in the long thin part of your double underneath. He looked at corporate social responsibility and he says this quote: "There is one and only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud." Now, you don't need all of that quote, but even if you just write down the free competition without deception or fraud, what he's saying is you can basically do anything as long as you are open about it. You might want to get the bit of the quote that says about designed to increase profits. What he's promoting there is the idea of capitalism, the idea of a business owner can do whatever they want to make money and profits, because that's the point of business, as long as you are open about it. Friedman in this was reacting to the idea that businesses have a social responsibility to improve workers' lives and help communities. For Friedman, this is socialism, the idea that you should consider everybody, look at the working conditions. He argues that this makes capitalism less effective, and that actually by giving business owners the freedom that they will do this automatically, but by making them do it, it doesn't work as well. So he is supporting the view that private ownership, that people that own the businesses should be able to freely make profits as long as they're open about it. You of course will not get a specific question on Milton Friedman in your exam, however he is definitely a name I would consider dropping in. Even if all you remember is that Milton Friedman is talking about businesses making profit. But then isn't that the point of business anyway? Box underneath then is for the strengths and weaknesses of Milton Friedman's view. So those go in the two connected underneath. The strengths of his view. The main focus of business should be to make profits. Why on earth would you start a business not wanting to make profit? You wouldn't get any money from a bank, for example, if you didn't have a business plan that made profits. In a way, Friedman's theory does promote it because people will still do it. People will still promote social responsibility. And a successful business, at the end of the day, will help the economy and society anyway. Lots of businesses that are not successful do not help society. A successful business employs people, brings lots of suppliers in, consumers in, etc. Problems, however. Friedman argued that it should not be forced by the government. So in the case of the Henry Ford case, if it's not made to be done by the government, will some people then just not do it? Similarly, companies can still be very successful while promoting things other than profits. Milton Friedman says there is one focus, and that's profits. The problem with that is you can still make profits but still really considering your social responsibility, such as to your stakeholders, to the community, to charities, etc. So social responsibility should be at the side of it, not underneath it. It shouldn't be an afterthought, it should be seen as equal. Yeah.
What's the middle one, mate?
Of which one?
In the issue.
Milton Friedman's arguing that you should just focus on profits. What that's saying is that the company can still be successful looking at different methods of looking at society as well, not just keeping the tunnel vision on profits. Because he says if you start thinking of all these other things, then you're not going to be successful. And what that's arguing is, yes, you can be successful whilst considering society and everything else.
Could you use Body Shop as an example of that?
Yeah, definitely Body Shop would work nicely. Or Lush. Box underneath then where we're going is into shareholders and stakeholders. Businesses have a duty and an obligation to consider the effects of their activities on society as a whole. So there is no specific box for the title, but you can just write it in between the boxes if you want to write it small, that's fine. This is the idea that they have a duty, nice link to Kant there, and the idea of duty, and an obligation to look at how their activities, how their business affects the whole of society. A shareholder. A shareholder is somebody that has money in a business, and if that business is profitable, they make money back from it. It's very, very straightforward. Stocks and shares is like what Wall Street is. Businesses invest their money into companies. If that company does well, they get more return on their money. If a business goes bust, they lose that money. Businesses then use the money in order to make themselves successful, hence why you lose your money if the business isn't. Many of your parents and grandparents will have shares. Stakeholders. A business must monitor and ensure it complies not only with the law but accepted ethical standards as well. This means you have to consider employees, consumers and the community. The next slide's got stakeholders in a bit more detail. These are people that have something at stake, something at risk. However, the question is this, and again, don't worry about putting the question in a box, it's more just to consider it when you go back through it later. Is this just hypocritical window dressing to cover greed? Basically, are people saying, oh, we're considering our stakeholders, oh, we're considering our shareholders? No, they're not, they're just wanting to make profit. They want to make themselves richer. So is this just window dressing? Are they just window dressing the front of their business to look ethical, and it isn't really? That again is the intrinsic, extrinsic reasons. Are they doing it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons? So what are stakeholders? You have internal and external stakeholders. You have two boxes underneath with the arrows going to them. Internal stakeholders are people inside the business that have something at stake. So an internal stakeholder would be the owners. They have their whole business at stake. The managers who have their high-paid jobs, the workers who need their wages, the suppliers who want to keep giving their business and keep giving their supplies to be sold. And finally, the lenders. A bank lends you money. They want their money back. External stakeholders were people like customers. You want your shop to remain in business so that you can keep buying it. The community, because you want to bring in business for the local people. And the environment. You want to make sure that this business abides certain working hour laws, that they aren't dumping their waste in the seas or onto the streets. You don't want noisy nighttime deliveries, for example. So these are all the things a business has to consider. Does anyone have any questions so far? This is the heaviest part of it. The rest of it is slightly easier. But this is just name dropping. As soon as you realise that, as soon as it's just dropping in a bit of shareholders and stakeholders here and there in your essays, you'll get the marks. So it sounds difficult, it really isn't. Alright, box underneath then is for the next slide. Relationship between business and consumer. Originally this just meant don't con your consumers, don't con your buyers. So for example, being missold PPI. PPI was added on when people got loans or mortgages and things like that. PPI was an extra expense that was added on at the end that you signed and paid for. The reason people are getting PPI back now is because it was already part of what you were paying for. So people were basically paying for it twice. They were conned into paying for it. They were conned into paying for something that was already included in what they'd bought. Hence why people are getting a lot of money back. Why? Because they were conned by the business. Not only do people not want to be conned though now, they also expect businesses to have quality, safety, price and good customer service. We expect these things. We expect when we buy something it to be a certain quality. We expect it to be safe. We expect it to have a good price. You don't expect to buy it at one place and go next door and it be £10 cheaper. And you expect good customer service. That's why there used to be mystery shoppers and things like that. So you would expect good treatment of employees, putting back into the community, environmental concerns, so making sure they recycle, not using sweatshops. And we as a consumer are crucial to change in businesses because of things like because of things like social media. What's the first thing you do if you buy something or get bad customer service? You have a little rant on Facebook, you put something on Twitter. If you bought something that's absolute rubbish, you'd post it on Instagram or whatever if you post on Instagram, but you'd make it public. People would be aware of it. That is not good business. People read reviews online for products, and so you have a very important impact on the success of a business. A lot of years ago, Nike and Gap nearly shut down over child labour. There are a lot of programs like Watchdog or Panorama which basically the programs that whistleblow on companies. When the Nike and the Gap programs, I think it was a Panorama that came out, both of the shops nearly shut down. There was inside footage of them using child labour within sweatshops. People were horrified. People stopped buying from them. Nike and Gap had to, obviously they're still around today. Why? Because they had to do a very quick change. They fired a load of people, said it was there, they didn't realise what was going on, fired loads, and then they changed the face of their business. But the question at the bottom is very, very important, and this is a question you can ask in your exam. Would they have changed if they hadn't have been caught out? That's the battle between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. Did they change because they knew what they were doing was wrong, or did they change because they were caught? And again, we don't have the answer to that, but you can certainly pose that answer. All right, box at the bottom of the page. Employers versus employees. That's all that goes in that bottom box, please. So your bottom box is this idea of balance of interests. The employers want to be able to plan for the future, knowing they've got enough money and things to keep them going. They want to make profits and keep their employees motivated. Employees want the best working conditions, job security. They want to make sure they get paid. You don't want to work for somebody that says, oh, I'll owe you next month. if an employee is unhappy, this leads to bad outcomes, such as high turnover. What that means is you can't hold on to your staff. Poor timekeeping, people come late to work, that means someone else has to cover them or they have to do without them. Absenteeism, always ringing in sick, that means you have to then get overtime, cover staff. All of this results in less profit. Once you're happy, turn over your sheet. The easiest way to deal with business in your exam, if it was me doing business as a question, the first thing I would do is I would write down all my keywords. So I would quickly write down, like I did on the board before, shareholders, stakeholders, employees, corporate social responsibility. I'd write them down even on my question paper. Because if I was thinking, oh, can't, duty, oh, business, what do I link it to? Have a list of keywords there, then you think, oh, duty of an employer to an employee. Oh, duty of a business to look after their stakeholders. It's so much easier to make the links when you write them down. So I'd write them down first. The next big one then is whistleblowers. It's split into two. One side is for what they are, second side is for the Karen Silkwood case. So that goes in the first half. Someone who risks their livelihood to tell the truth about companies and make businesses accountable for their actions. It should be for their actions, sorry, not of their actions. Whistleblowers are protected by the law. They are treated as witnesses to crimes and can choose to give information anonymously. And this is to encourage whistleblowing as something that serves the public interest. It is a huge risk, is whistleblowing. If you are known to be a whistleblower, you're practically unemployable. Because who would employ a whistleblower? Even if you're the most ethical business, you would not want to be called out. So you are protected by the law, but I don't know how much protection that really would bring. Box next to it then is Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood is a case you can use. You can use Erin Brockovich if you prefer. There is a lot more out there though if you do wish to use a different one. In 1974 she was killed in a car accident. She was doing a campaign against the company she worked for, Kern McGee, which was a plutonium plant in Oklahoma. She was also very, very active as far as she was part of the union. She was an activist about safety, so she was very outspoken with these things. And what she realised was, and she was testifying to the Atomic Energy Commission, that she found serious violations of safety, including evidence of spills, leaks, faulty fuel rods, and enough missing plutonium to make multiple nuclear weapons. During the week prior to her death, Silkwood was reportedly gathering evidence for the union to support her claim against them. Now, the image on the power plant side is of a tomato that has been what's the word? Exposed, that's the word. Exposed to plutonium. I cannot show you an image of a person that has been exposed to plutonium. Why? Because it's, well, no, I wouldn't, Sam. Why? Because it is so bad. And so she says that there's enough missing to make a nuclear weapon or multiple nuclear weapons, which were basically weapons of mass destruction. If a weapon of such type was dropped, it would cause serious astronomical effects. Alright, so final section then is globalisation. You're doing very, very well. I know that you are getting quite tired now. Globalisation, the box underneath is split into three. This is for the next slide, so you have plenty of space for the next slide. All of that top bit goes into the first part of that big box, and then the two bits underneath again are for the boxes underneath the justifications and the issues. So all of this slide is in that large box, please. Globalisation is what all companies want to be. All companies want to be global. This is far, far easier now. Far easier. Why? Because technology is changing. 20 years ago, if you had businesses in Australia, Japan, you'd have to travel to all these different places to actually have meetings. Now you can Skype, now you can have conference calls with people all over the world. Very, very easy. You can ring these places, you can talk to people direct, far easier than you ever could do. Transport is cheaper and faster. Removal of capital exchange control, so you can move your money easier. Obviously, these things might change depending on the current situation. Consumer tastes have also changed. We are now willing to try foreign foods. Even if you ask your grandparents, the chances are they would still like their kind of beef and Yorkshire puddings meal. Chances are they would not remember growing up with chicken kormas or sweet and sour pork or even pizzas. These are tastes that we now have. These are foods that we are accustomed to and like. Most of you now will have a foreign food pretty much every day of the week. So this means that businesses can now focus on this in order to make profits. They know this is what the customers want, this is what the people are buying, therefore this is what they're going to produce. Also, we like getting year-round food. We like having strawberries all year round. How do businesses justify globalisation? They justify, so this goes into the box underneath, please. They justify it by saying at least it gives jobs and small incomes to poor communities, because they obviously don't follow minimum wage, but they still say, oh, it's some wage that they get. It trains local people to new skills, because every local person wants to be able to cut out an apple in the back of an iPad, but it gives them skills. It makes us happy because we get cheaper clothing, consumerism. If you ever are shopping in an area where there's a Primark, in about a 1 mile radius, you will know there is a Primark. Why? Because pretty much every single person will have a Primark bag. Because it's cheap. Primark is cheap because they keep the labour cheap and they mass produce the clothes on a very high level. Be under no illusion though, Primark uses exactly the same factories as Asda, Marks and Spencer's, Debenhams. They all use the same sweatshops. Marks and Spencer's charges more because they make more profit, not because the money goes back to the people that make it. The issues: global companies taking trade from smaller businesses. So, for example, the Caribbean banana couldn't compete with Del Monte. Del Monte is the massive conglomerate for mass-producing bananas. So the small businesses cannot compete. They can't make enough to keep their money down, still make a profit and compete with these big companies. It keeps poor communities poor and big companies rich. Why? Because the money's keeping going out of the country. They're not paying the people enough to keep the money inside. It takes away jobs from countries with strict human rights. How many factories are in this country? How many of your clothes are made in England? Very, very few. Why? Because we have such strict human rights laws, which means it's far more expensive to pay us than pay somebody in Turkey. Indigenous cultures are affected. What that means is the people's cultures are affected by the different factories, the different businesses, etc. They have to put them somewhere, so deforestation and pollution. They have to build the factories somewhere, so often the trees are chopped down. And finally, child labour. These countries have no laws on your minimum age of working, so anybody can work if they want to. Okay, we're doing very, very well, everyone. Box underneath then is the reality of sweatshops. This again, it's very important that you use examples in your exam. So the box underneath is for the reality of what happens. In 2013, so we're not talking a lot of years ago, 24th of April, we're looking at quite close to 6 years. No. What year are we in? 2018? 5 years. 6 years, yeah. Do you really remember that happening?
Well, you were only 13. Weren't you? With 14.
Blimey
I
heck.
would have not been 14.
Yeah, yeah, because this was a massive thing. So the reality of sweatshops in 2013, a poorly made Bangladeshi factory collapsed. This provided clothes for companies like Primark and also Asda. 1,100 people died in the Rana Plaza. 2,500 were injured. It was an 80-storey building that collapsed. The garment workers were ordered to return to work. Some were threatened with being docked a month's wages, so they were threatened to not be paid. An investigation found that the upper factory floors had not been designed or reinforced for the heavy machinery. What was interesting is the shops on the bottom floors, they started to show massive cracks the day before, all shut. So all the lower floor shops shut and closed because it was unsafe. The workers on the top floor flats were ordered to go back to work. Otherwise, they would lose their livelihood, and these people needed the money in order to survive. So they were forced to go to work and the building collapsed. Why did this happen? Because the businesses could get away with it. Amnesty International looked into this afterwards and is still campaigning for global human rights, which means everybody should have rights, regardless of what country you work and live in. 30 million was given in compensation. I don't know who got the money though. Health and safety in all buildings was done, and 35 further unsafe factories were shut down. 35. Would they have been shut down if that factory hadn't fallen down? Probably not. So the question is, why do people have to die, like the suicide nets at Apple? Why do people have to die for factories and for companies to do something about it? Why did the Rana Plaza have to fall down in order for the other factories to be checked? Shouldn't they be checked in the first place? Three boxes left. One is for a man named Cardinal Vincent Nichols, one underneath for Kant, one underneath for utilitarianism. So you're doing very, very well. I know you're tired now, but this probably is one of the most extensive ones. Alright, so final part then. That was just some images from the building. Let me just put that all up there. The Blueprint for Better Business by Cardinal Vincent Nichols. So this goes in the third from the bottom of the sheet. In 2012, yes, he's a cardinal, which means he's a Christian. So it's kind of thinking, where does this link into it? Yes, he links to the ideas of natural law and Catholic teachings. But as you work your way through these 7, you should be able to see a lot of links to both Kant and utilitarianism. You don't have to remember all 7. You don't have to remember them in this order. The point is to use these to link to Kant and utilitarianism. That's what makes it relevant. So the first one is human dignity. Each person can never be merely an instrument valued just for their usefulness. There is a very obvious link in that to Kant. There is a very obvious link in that to utilitarianism. Can anybody tell me what they might be?
The ends in themselves.
So ends in themselves for who? Which argument? For Kant, good as part of...
his second working proposition, is it? Categorical imperative.
Excellent, Sam. The second categorical imperative, means to an end, or the kingdom of ends idea. Yep, not using people as a means. Very, very good, Sam. How does it link to utilitarianism? Alfie?
The Mills, I don't remember his thing was on utilitarianism.
Excellent. Very, very good, Alfie. It also links to Mill's principle of utility, the idea of happiness and happiness for others. What does the name utilitarianism mean? Usefulness. Exactly what that's saying there. Instrument, not just for their usefulness. So as soon as you use the word usefulness, you know you've got a link there to utilitarianism. The next one is the common good, the set of social conditions which allow people more easily to develop individually and communally. Solidarity, the idea of that we are codependent on each other, means we have to look to each other and strive for a common good. Subsidiary, the idea that it's not only good business practice, but it's good for the person, so it's efficient. Good for the people, good for the business. Fraternity, the idea of being in a fellowship with different cultures. So that's the idea of the indigenous and what you were saying with the chicken burgers and McDonald's. So that would be an example of fraternity. Number 6, the idea of reciprocating, or this idea of giving everybody what is due to them, so giving back to the people, giving what they deserve. And finally, this idea of sustainability, the idea of you need to look to future generations. Number 7 is very, very important. Utilitarianism doesn't just look at the pleasure of the individual at that point, you've got to look to future generations as well. So utilitarianism also looks to future generations, which is what number 7 links to there. All right, 5 minutes a slide, you're doing very well. Kantian ethics then, these are just some ideas. You don't have to mention all of these, and of course you can mention many of your own. Whistleblowing, the idea of it is important to keep your promises. So Kant talks about lying promise, so have companies made lies and promises that they aren't going to keep, therefore whistleblowing brings them out. But then haven't you made promises to your employer as well, so aren't you breaking your promise to them? Globalisation, using countries that have fewer human rights for cheap labour, are you not using those people as a means to an end? You cannot universalise exploiting every nation, every person, so there's no goodwill and duty there. Now, those 2 bullet points are very, very important to Kant. Kant was extremely focused on the idea of equality. Opposed to slavery, so you could link into things like the Rana Plaza case. And then you have William Temple. William Temple is somebody that influenced Joseph Fletcher's situation ethics. William Temple talks about Christianity and social order, and he looks at focusing on the acts always being good for the persons. You should never manipulate the market, so the stock market, the consumer market, in order to create shortages to maximise profits. So often companies say there's a shortage, so people panic and buy more. William Temple is arguing that is wrong. That is not like the goodwill ideas of Kant. Finally, utilitarianism, last but not least. Utilitarianism, only a few more. You've done very, very well today. I know you're tired now. You might want to resist whistleblowing, depends on how much harm it will be done in that particular case. You need to weigh up the balance of good versus harm. Globalisation, keeping the lowest price for us, doesn't that just mean greatest happiness for the greatest number? Even though Bentham did reject this view, he didn't believe that you should have cheap labour to make more people happy. He did believe in paying people what they deserved. Finally, Peter Singer is a modern utilitarian. He used to be on the old spec. Peter Singer is the man that talks about quality of life in euthanasia and things like that. He argues that we should focus on minimising pain rather than maximising pleasure. Why? Because pain is far more universal than pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody. Well done today.